So first of all, I'd like to say welcome to the CBWN 2020 AGM. My name's Claire Pollacole, and I am the current coordinator. I just wanted to say a quick thank you to all of you for taking the time to join us today on Zoom during this very interesting time we're all going through. Obviously, initially it wasn't our plan to have a Zoom AGM, but with the times, that's how it's going to have to be. So today we hope to share with you where we are currently at as an organisation and also where we're headed over the next little while. So I hope you enjoy. So I just wanted to pop a slide up to sort of describe how we're hoping today's meeting will run and just a few little things to be mindful of, seeing as we're using Zoom this time. So we're hoping that this meeting will be roughly 1 hour long, with time at the end for questions and comments, as I mentioned earlier. So please hold your questions until the end if you can. So we've disabled everyone else's video for this meeting when you entered, and it was my plan to have my video up, but that's not working, so we'll just be screen sharing for today. And as I mentioned a little earlier, upon your entry to the meeting, we had also muted participants just to avoid sort of hearing any background noises. I know everybody's at home, so there might be kids running around or dogs barking, that kind of thing, so we're just trying to keep it as easy for everybody to hear as possible. And I'm sure most of you are now familiar with Zoom, but if you are a little unfamiliar, you're able to locate your controls by hovering your mouse at the bottom of the screen. And if you do have any questions throughout the webinar, which is sort of more tech related, you can pop them in the chat box, or if there's something you want to come back to later, feel free to pop it in the chat box and we'll try to address it if it's sort of a content related question at the end there. So during the current circumstances of coronavirus, we'll be voting based on unanimous consent, which means that motions are going to pass unless we hear objections. A traditional vote will take place if there are any objections to a motion. For any technical issues, first of all, it would be really great if you tried to log in again. And if you have any problems, persisting problems, you can type your question in the chat box, and we have Nicole here who's helping out sort of with the tech side of things, so hopefully she's able to help you out with addressing that. And finally, this meeting is recorded and it will be made available on our website within about a week. All right. I did want to say a really big thank you to all of our sponsors and partners for supporting our work here in the Columbia Basin. The Columbia Basin Trust has provided us with core funding for the past few years, so they've been a really great help for us. Selkirk College has also assisted us with various contributions and assistance through multiple programs, but probably most notably, we have worked with the college on the summer mapping program. That has also allowed us to be helped out through MyTax, and we are continually supported by Living Lakes Canada as well. All right, so I popped a slide up on the mission and vision. So CBWN's mission is that we work with members and partners to increase the impact and effectiveness of non-profit watershed stewardship groups and volunteers in improving watershed health. And our vision is that watershed groups and volunteers across the Columbia Basin actively and effectively engage with partners in conserving and managing healthy, functioning watersheds. Obviously, there's a little bit more to those, so feel free to have a quick read. Okay, so I'm hoping that everyone's sort of had a chance to review a copy of the agenda and the meeting minutes, which were mailed out, I think, last week. So if you haven't, this is the agenda up on the screen at the moment. And for the purposes of formalities, we still need to have someone move to adopt the 2020 agenda and the 2019 meeting minutes, and then someone to second these movements. So the way that we are going to do this is, if anybody is happy to move to adopt the 2020 agenda and you're on a computer, if you could type your name and adopt in the chat box. If you're on a phone, you're able to unmute yourself and speak your name and mention that you would like to adopt the 2020 agenda. I'll let you know when this is going to take place. So then, if that is moved, could someone please mention their name either via the chat box again and that they would like to second? And if you're on the phone, unmute yourself and mention your name and that you'd like to second. So originally I was going to take everybody off mute, but I think it might be easiest if those people who are happy to move or second adopting the 2020 agenda to do that themselves. So now I'm just going to check because we have a chat in the chat box here. Okay, so we have from Kalish, she would like to adopt the 2020 agenda, and Kendall would like to second. And Bill would like to adopt the minutes. Would anybody like to second? Adopting the minutes, that is, sorry. Thank you, Anne, very much. Perfect. Whoops, okay, let me just.
Claire, just a quick comment. It doesn't appear anyone is calling in. It looks like everybody is using the Zoom interface.
Perfect, okay, that's great. So thank you everybody for making that as easy and as smooth as possible. I really appreciate that. I was a little bit worried about how that would go with multiple people taking themselves off mute at the same time. All right, so that's great. So now we can move on to the chair report, which Maggie is going to be giving today. So Maggie, take it away.
Hi, everybody. I am now on the other side of the world from Claire. I'm in everybody's backyard in person. So we're going to talk a lot about a lot of the things I want to talk about will be talked about later in the meeting, so I won't spend a lot of time as giving a chair report. I do want to thank Claire for starting on time. That was spectacular. I saw that at least a dozen of us signed in early, so I think the whole Zoom, GoToMeeting, whatever platform is starting to be second nature for a lot of us, so that was great. And I saw by the numbers that more people are attending this AGM than attended last year's AGM. So that's kind of cool. I'm happy about that. In terms of recent history, I think most of you know the last time many of us got together was at the fall meeting. And that was a distributed meeting. We did a traveling roadshow, went to a few places. That was something that had been requested by a few groups to make it easier for groups to get to the meeting so that nobody had to drive sort of 3 or 4 hours through blinding snowstorms to get together. They were very well attended. We were happy with that. And that's when, Living Lakes did some presentations on the monitoring collaborative, and some of the groups got their first real indication of what was coming our way. No surprise, we've talked about this before. We started talking last April at our AGM then about the reduction in funding that we were facing. CBT was sunsetting their funding for us, and so we knew we had to make some changes, and we've made a fair amount of progress this year. Right now we are transitioning, that's the term we're using. The network is still staying a functioning network, but we are going to step back a little bit. You'll see later we're having our board elections. Almost everyone has elected to stay on the board. So we're going to carry on, but we're just going to have a little bit of a little less activity. We are right now in the process of kicking off the summer mapping program, and 4 groups were selected to receive funding this year, and Claire will talk a little bit more about that later, so I won't go into any detail. And I believe Kat will be going into a bit more detail about the Columbia Basin Water Hub. I can never keep track of what the name is, but I think we've got an official name now. So the future direction is, as I say, we're shutting down a few of our activities. We're still going to carry on with our outreach and network activities, keeping all the members linked as much as possible. The newsletters there might be a little bit of a reduction, but we're still going to produce them to try to keep everyone aware of what everybody else is doing. And we're going to support the water hub as we move forward. And that's how we can make it a little bit more tangible for this water stewardship groups in the ones that are doing water monitoring, they'll get some tangible benefits from the work they've been doing. I think right now, I guess the one thing we're all looking forward to, the hydrologist meeting and some of the direction that's going to come out of that in terms of water monitoring priorities. But I guess, as I said, I'll let Kat and some of the others describe that a little bit more. So if that's all I have, we could take some questions at the end if anyone has specific questions. And if not, I think Claire can open the chat box again if someone wants to move that you accept the chair report just for information.
Okay, so everyone can see my chat. Would anybody like to move to accept the information there? Perfect, thank you, Anne. And do we need someone to second as well, Maggie, or?
I don't think necessarily, but we could get someone. That's fine. It's just being accepted for information, but so it's not really a vote.
Thanks, Kalish. That's great. I might just quickly ask if people who aren't sort of speaking in the presentation at the moment, would you mind just muting yourself because we had a little bit of background noise there? That would be very helpful. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Maggie, for that update. It seems I have to change slides down the bottom here. So, all right. Next is the Treasurer report, which is going to be given by Alan, our Treasurer. So take it away, Alan.
Just want to check you can hear me?
Yes.
Yes, great. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for attending. It's great attendance for this AGM. So I'm Alan Thompson. I'm the treasurer for the network and have been so for the last few years. Got a couple of slides up here for you. Basically, these are the kind of the year-end financials for the network. And before I kind of dive into the numbers, and I won't spend very long this at all, I just want to give some context to these numbers and just wanted to let you know that if you're not kind of aware of the network financials, or you haven't heard this kind of presentation in the past, that for the most part, the network receives funding from the CBT. And as Maggie mentioned earlier, that funding has been reduced for this last year. But our fiscal year is basically January to December. So it basically follows a calendar year. But our program runs basically from the kind of the midsummer to late summer to the following spring. So that's kind of where most of our activity is, and the summer is more of a slower period. So that's generally where all the expenditures and all the activity occurs, basically from fall till spring. But the financials reflect kind of the calendar year. So just keep that in mind as you're having a look at these figures. So just I want to quickly, let's look at the profit and loss slide, the one that's on the right-hand side of the screen first. And during the last fiscal, our income was basically around $66,000. These are all in round numbers. And that was the vast bulk of that was through a CBT grant. There was $40,000 in this last spring, and then another $25,000 top up in the fall, and a few other small grants, but the vast majority of that is CBT funding. And then, so our expenses were basically, the majority of our expenses is involved in having various contractors help us out with running the program. So we have we had a senior manager in the spring, and then Living Lakes took over from that position in the fall, and so they've been doing a fantastic job. And you can see there that kind of the operations expenses there resulted in about $43,000 in fees for doing that work over the year. In terms of program expenses, we had the usual program expenses that you would expect. The main programs that we offer are the mapping services that Maggie, mapping services program that's operated through Selkirk College that Maggie mentioned earlier. That's a $12,000 item, and we'll be doing that program again this summer. Then, of course, our two meetings, one in the fall and one in the spring. And then we have various travel-related expenses as we're moving down the thing here. moving down the list. Our water fund program expenses of $4,100, they were, that was basically the leftover from a grant that we had from the Loblaws Foundation, Water Fund Foundation. And that was, that kind of went out the door last spring. And so that program is completely tied up. And a new program that we brought in last year was the member water monitoring equipment grants. And that was, it was very well received. Most of you, or a number of you anyway, received money to update basically your monitoring equipment or do whatever you needed to do to keep your systems, your monitoring up and running. And those are grants upwards of $400 each. And most groups took the whole $400. A couple did not, and that basically amounted into a $4,300 expenditure. So basically, our expenses rolled out to be about $25,000, and then the rest of it is, you know, your basic office management type of things, graphics, web hosting services, bank service charges, all that kind of stuff. So basically, last year we spent, in the calendar year, we spent a little bit more, $5,000 more, actually $5,100 more than we took in. I mean, that's not a problem. Just as I was mentioning before, that our kind of operational year basically runs fall to spring. So looking at the other sheet, the balance sheet, kind of gives you an indication. So the sheet on the image on the left, it kind of gives you an indication where basically our assets and our liabilities are, and as of the end of last year. And we had both in the bank and then accounts receivable, we had a total of about $39,000. And we had on the liabilities and equity side, we had kind of liabilities about $10,000. That was outstanding payments that was largely due to Living Lakes. And then unrestricted assets around $34,000, and basically the total liabilities and equity come out to be about $39,000. So those are the financials for the network. We're in good shape, and I'd be happy to entertain questions, I guess, at the end of the AGM.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Alan.
Thank you.
Okay. So next, we are going to cover new business and current programs. So this is just sort of an overview of what's to come. We'll go into a bit more detail in the next couple of slides. So first of all, I wanted to mention that the mapping program, which I'm going to speak to, then we have some updates on the Columbia Basin Water Monitoring Collaborative, and Maggie mentioned this program, I suppose, was brought up first last year at the fall meeting. So I'm hoping most of you have some idea of what that entails. And the topics that we're going to cover under the Monitoring Collaborative include funding for equipment and monitoring design and support, the Columbia Basin Water Hub, webinars and user manual. Hydrologist meeting and background information, and the monitoring mini documentary, and then a webinar from the Flow H2O pilot and artificial intelligence. I might just quickly check that I've got most people on mute. 1 second here. I think everyone's on mute. Okay, that's great. All right. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the summer mapping program. So I'm hoping most of you have heard of it before. It's been running for at least the last 5 years and is running again this year. And I wanted to say a big thank you to those who managed to put in an application. This program tends to run from May until around September. And so it's just started up again this year. And as Maggie mentioned, we had 4 groups apply and all have been accepted. And they all have really interesting mapping projects lined up. So I'm going to sort of give you a brief outline of what the groups have applied to have done as part of this program. So the first group was the Roslyn Stream Keepers, and they are looking for a map which covers current land use and a detailed map of Cambridge Creek, Cambridge Reservoir and Violin Lake. And they would like this area mapped for outreach purposes. Additionally, they would like valuable information about forest cover and topography so that they can use the information to fabricate a 3D portable model and future pamphlets illustrating the recreational trail system. So I'm really excited to actually see how all of these maps turn out. So please keep me updated, everybody. The next group was the Laird Creek water users. Their project is to provide baseline mapping support, baseline mapping to support watershed protection and community water sustainability. A number of maps they would like produced, outlining logging blocks and roads in the watershed from 2007, current ecosystem types, current logging operations, and the impact of logging on wildlife, which is using the area. The third group is the Lake Windermere Ambassadors. The scope of their project is to replicate some work which was completed in 2011, and this work involved mapping vegetation that's in Lake Windermere to compare changes that have occurred since. So the information will be used to determine whether there has been increased plant growth in the lake and to provide more insight, as they had some concerns from local residents. And the final group was the Gar Creek Water Users Association. The scope of their project is to develop a detailed layered map of the Argenta Johnson's Landing face, extending from Hamel Creek in the north to Fry Creek in the south. They would like a map with many layers, or potentially a few maps. And the layers that they want included, ideally, I'm just going to run through a few of them because there was a few listed. So topographical formations, geotechnical slope classifications, hydrology, vegetation layers, existing and proposed cut blocks, roads, public and FSR, parks, protected areas, private property, and caribou habitat and wildlife corridors. So some really interesting components to be mapped there. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how that sort of pans out. And so this is a program which we work on with Selkirk College, and this year they've provided us with a GIS graduate, Kyla, and Kyla has a background in aquatic ecology. So she's going to be producing maps with the groups. And at the end of this program, groups are required to submit a report. And so we're going to share the findings and more information about how the projects have progressed over the summer up on our website. So please keep an eye out as sort of September rolls around, and we should be updating those there. Okay, so that covers the mapping program. I'm gonna move on to the next one, which is the Columbia Basin Water Monitoring Collaborative. And this one is, Kat is going to speak to this, talking about funding for monitoring equipment, monitoring design and support. So Kat, if you're there, if you could unmute yourself, go for it.
Great, thanks, Claire. Can everyone hear me? Oh, can you hear me anyway?
Yes.
Everyone. Okay, great, thanks. So it's Claire. I'm at my mother's house in Victoria, so sometimes the Wi-Fi is a little bit sketchy here. So yeah, there have been, so we had great plans and great vision for the funds that we were planning to secure for supporting water monitoring groups on the ground, either with study design or equipment or getting out into the field. And so some of the funders have got, when this whole pandemic hit, immediately contacted us literally within weeks, letting us know that their funding would not be available for our work. So so that was Lush, who are dependent on the sales of their soap products. We had potentially, well, we were getting money from them for Living Lakes Canada, but also for the network. And so they said that that has to be put on hold. Mountain Equipment Co-op is the same. Same with BC Real Estate Foundation, whose intake has changed now. They normally have a fall intake, and they're not sure when to open up for receiving applications again. And they are quite strong supporters of the Monitoring Collaborative. As well as RBC, and then finally CBT, which was our big one. And so for CBT, we'd requested a significant amount of money, like $500,000, to support the work on the ground through the Monitoring Collaborative, based on some of the priority monitoring areas that were determined at the hydrology meeting, which will be, we will get to that later. And so CBT was concerned about the fact that we had not clearly identified our governance model for the monitoring collaborative in that. And so I'm not sure what that means exactly, because the governance for this network is our board, which is us. The governance for Living Lakes is our board, which we have a board that we're reporting to, obviously, as a registered charitable organization in Canada. But there's multiple ways to look at governance. So there's the governance for data sharing agreements, which are required for the open source data hub. There's the governance of funds. So the vision was to have a trust fund attached to the collaborative for the redistribution of monies to groups on the ground. And then there's the governance as it ties into the Water Sustainability Act and how to make sure that the monitoring collaborative is legitimized in the eyes of the province, and that we're supporting not only our community needs to understand and assess our watershed health, but also that we're helping support data collection requirement for decision makers. So, so basically that was the rationale with CBT in terms of not providing that larger amount of money. Which, so that's something then that I'm hoping we will be able to discuss. What we had done originally was we had reached out to the University of Saskatchewan, who are involved with the Global Water Futures project, which is the largest freshwater project in Canada, and I think they ended up getting 70 million or something like that, and they're getting more money every year. And one of their advisors and one of their participants was somebody who specialized in governance and who said she was interested to help us set up a governance model for the collaborative, because the idea and the vision was that Living Lakes was the facilitator to move this collaborative to be its own standalone entity with an attached trust. The other people who are going to help us with that was Watersheds BC, which is a think tank that originally started with Polis Foundation, or with the Polis Institute out of UVic. And they also were interested to support what they thought would be a good governance model. So neither of those commitments came through. They were redirected. And so we're still having to get that sorted. And so, you know, the option is, and so we're left with, you know, 2 potential interim models, none of which were satisfying the needs of the Columbia Basin Trust. So we've been given some money to work on that and make sure that within the next 8 months, we've got a very solid governance model that satisfies the trust, so that they can then insert a larger amount of money to be redistributed to groups to do the monitoring. As well, the trust is reassessing their, they do I think every 3 years they try to reassess what comes to the top in terms of priorities for the basin, for where they want to distribute funds. And we want to make sure that we're working with them so that water monitoring percolates to the top as one of these priorities that we need to address, since it's obviously we are not going to build climate resiliency into our communities without understanding and knowing our hydrology to build our water balance and water budgets as needed. So that is basically the long and the short of the funding scenario. The ultimate goal, which we've laid out, and obviously open to any kind of feedback, is that we were hoping to within 2 years raise at least 2 million, with the goal of 10 million for the redistribution to the monitoring on the ground, either through the monitoring groups or through consultants. So that's ambitious but necessary. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when.
Perfect. Thank you, Kat, for that update. We will have time at the end to cover questions on that. So for now, I will move on to...
Oh, you know what? Actually, can I just add one more thing? We do have an outstanding application still through the network with Columbia Power, I think. So that's being submitted. Just so, yeah.
That's a little grant there, but I'm submitting it, so hope for the best. Okay, so I'm going to be covering the Water Data Hub launch, webinars, and user manual. So the Data Hub is currently being tested. It's been completed by our developer, and so a few members of Living Lakes are uploading data into it at the moment. and just sort of ironing out any of the last minute kinks. And then we will be announcing a soft launch on our website once testing is complete. So we're hoping that sort of happens around June. So please keep an eye on the website for updates there. Living Lakes Canada is going to be also developing webinars which will be available in June and will outline how to upload your data correctly, the metadata requirements, and where to source assistance. We've had a user manual which has also been developed by our the developer of the database, which we're hoping sort of requires enough, holds enough information. But yeah, we're hoping to have feedback as well. So the way that the network members will be involved in this prior to sort of outside people having access to it is we're hoping to invite everybody to participate and provide feedback before we release this to sort of the general public. We know everybody has a lot of expertise and probably a lot of data to share. So we're really hoping to get your feedback on the Data Hub, questions and comments, and I'll be in touch with everybody about how to provide that. We are also hoping to hire a Selkirk College student to assist us with database management. So we currently have a position description advertised and are accepting applications to have someone to sort of maintain the data and assist groups with uploading and answer sort of questions and technical issues as groups start uploading their data. And this position will be starting in June. So that's really exciting. We're excited to have someone else join our team and help us work on that one. I'm sure people have questions about the Data Hub as well, but if you are able to hold them to the end, that would be really appreciated. So we'll move on to the hydrologist meeting, which is also in June, and I will leave this one up to Kat again to speak to you. Thanks, Kat.
Great, thanks, Claire. Also, just to get back to the funding, so we've also been asked by organizers such as Tides Canada to put forward what we think are shovel-worthy projects in the new green economy, if there's a stimulation package or not. So we put forward, again, the monitoring collaborative supporting groups on the ground and those kinds of things. So not to say that all is lost in the funding world right now. And as well, just to let people know that we're also being mentored by the Alberta Eco Society, who did manage to secure 33 million, but that was during the heyday of the oil patch. And so we have got some good advice from folks who have been securing and managing large sums of money. And so the hydrologist meeting was something that we put together so that we can get the direction in terms of, so there was 2 CBT reports. Martin Carver had authored both of them, and they were outlining the significant water data gaps that we have in the Columbia Basin in the 10 subregions, 10 hydrological subregions. And so what we were hoping to do is narrow down those large gaps of knowledge so that we would get to a place of understanding of where we needed to focus our monitoring efforts and why, and have them based on scientific rationale and ecosystem needs. So that's the conversation that's going to be led by Martin and Greg Utzig, and obviously out of our realm of expertise, but really wanting to help guide us as a collective collaborative moving forward to make sure that we're really strategic in the way that we monitor to build that climate resiliency in. And this was the directive as well by CBT in terms of them wanting to support us in a larger way. So that meeting is happening on June the 8th, and it would be great to get your, I'm not sure how we would do this, but to get some preliminary input from you in terms of areas that you think are of concern. I'm not sure if that's opening a Pandora's box or not, but certainly it's not meant to be a closed meeting, but rather it's a problem-solving meeting to figure out how we can determine what the priority monitoring areas are and why and for whom. And so we were given at one point a matrix by the province, but that matrix was more designed to identify resource. It was more resource-based in terms of the criteria. It wasn't necessarily a fit for us. So that matrix needed to be modified, and I guess this might be the first effort for that. So I don't know if there's anything else to add. I know Martin's on the call, so I don't know, Martin, if you want to chime in or not. I might, yeah, so I'll leave it at that for now.
No, I don't really have anything to add, but thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I just, I just didn't want to misrepresent the meeting.
I guess the main point though is that it's scientific rationale for where monitoring is needed. That's the focus, to try and stratify the variability in this rather large landscape. And that's why we're going to base first on hydrologic regions.
Right, thanks, Martin.
Yeah.
All right, thank you both of you, and thanks Martin for chiming in there. I think if anyone is looking for more information or has questions or would like to make a comment, please feel free to reach out to me via email and I can pass that information on. Okay, so we're a bit short on time. We have 2 minutes to cover the next couple of things, just so we have time for questions at the end. So we have the next point of discussion, which is back to Kat again, is the monitoring mini documentary. So Kat, if you would like to sort of give a brief update on that, and then we have one more thing to discuss before we have questions. Thanks, Kat.
Yeah, just to say that the monitoring that's being done in the basin by all of the groups, and particularly those groups that came on in the meetings in the fall and expressed their concerns for things that were happening, we really wanted to capture what's being done in the Columbia Basin and the effort and dedication of many, many volunteers, and put that into a mini documentary, not only for marketing purposes to solicit further funds for the basin work, for this monitoring work, but also to honor the people that have been doing this amazing work, like, people in all of their small valleys, and, when we went to the Slow Cannon and things like that, it feels like this information of people doing the monitoring as they have been for many, many years needs to be honored and shared. And I also think that it's possibly something that's fundable, because it's a different funding stream. So just another tool to heighten the profile of the work that's being done by the amazing people in the Columbia Basin who are so deeply dedicated. And I think that is an example that can be shared across Canada. So to that end, though, Claire is going to be reaching out to folks, because we're putting together a teaser to get the funding in place for this, and hoping to take B-roll this summer as well. So she'll be sending out a note around the opportunities to film folks while they're doing the monitoring, as well as perhaps get some pictures from people from them being in the field. So more to come on that. I know we don't have.
Thank you. Thanks, Kat. I also just wanted to mention that we definitely need some images so that we can promote this. We're going to be putting in a proposal next week. So if anybody has any images that they're happy to share with us of monitoring that their groups have done, that they're happy to have sort of put through in our proposal, please email those to me, ideally by the end of this week. No pressure, just if you know you have a bunch of images, we would really appreciate it so that we can use it and get your story out there. Thanks, Kat, for that. So next, we have Kat talking about the Flow H2O pilot project and artificial intelligence.
Yeah, it's a project that we got involved in because Pilar, who is leading this through Carl Data Solutions, is part of the IT steering committee for the monitoring collaborative. And so what they wanted to do is get a small pilot going to see how we can look at real-time data sensors being compared to machine learning and artificial intelligence, and look at the level of accuracy, because in the future, where there's no way we're going to get enough data from people being in streams and collecting data, there needs to be modeling that's accurate. And so she built, there was a consortium that was funded through the Supercluster Innovation Fund, It's definitely a for-profit based model. We have our non-for-profit based model using the CCAN platform on their same platform. And so it's an interesting experiment in social engineering around how you merge a non-for-profit mandate with a for-profit mandate, and making sure that we're still both staying true to our respective mandates. So there's going to be a small webinar about exactly what this platform is about. It's a pilot, so exactly what the tool is and what it can do and who can use it. And that will be done by somebody from the partnership and be made available to all of the groups in the basin, so people have an understanding of what the product is. Yeah, that's all about that.
Yes, that will be a lot more information in that webinar or presentation. Thank you, Kat, for that. Okay, so we now just, and Maggie sort of gave an update on this already earlier in her chair report, but Maggie, would you like to add any additional points to the future for CBWN that you feel you didn't cover earlier?
No, I think it's clear, and we've got the points stated on the slide. Just the biggest thing to say is that we're not going anywhere. The board still exists. The society still exists. We're just slowly ramping down some of our activities as we learn how we can engage more with the collaborative and the water hub. As Kat said, the funding's changed a little bit for that, the potential funding, so things might happen a little bit slower, but we're still going to keep everyone as connected as possible, and we'll be still be the go-to person to let you know what's happening, because our groups will be the ones that will be testing the monitoring, testing the data management systems. So that's how we envision the next little while.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much, Maggie. All right.
Just a quick, Phil had asked when the Flow webinar was, if you just had a quick answer for him.
I don't, but Kat might have a better idea. Do you know when they're planning to release that, Kat?
No, it's us actually organizing it. So it's just whenever, I actually have the phone call tomorrow to figure out a date of when he can do the webinar, so that we can, I guess it doesn't have to be recorded. I guess it can be live. So I don't know is the short answer, but hopefully before the end of May.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so now we have director elections. I'll just see if there was any more chat notes there. Okay, I think we're good for now. Oops. Hang on a second, we'll go back here. It works when it wants to. All right. So, director elections, as I mentioned. So, of course, we will ask for any nominations from the floor, as per usual, and nominations will be voted for, nominations we will vote for by general consent, as we mentioned earlier. If we don't hear any nominations from the floor, we'll vote for the board as presented. So currently, Maggie, as Maggie mentioned earlier, the board, everyone that's currently on the board has elected to remain. Those current members, as you can see on the screen, are Maggie Rummel, Chad Hughes, Georgia Peck, Phil Matson, Alan Thompson, Kat Hartwig, and Bill Cody. And so...
Sorry, Claire, I just want to interrupt. I did take Ed Gilmore's name off the list because just yesterday he reached out and said he was going to not stand for re-election. So we did modify the list a little bit. So we've lost one potential board member, but the rest are staying. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's great. Thanks for that update. So I'm now going to give everybody the option to speak if they would like to nominate anybody or themselves to be elected to be a board member for the network. So I will give everybody the option to do that now. So please mention in the chat box if you would like to nominate yourself or someone else. Okay, so I haven't heard any suggestions or nominations. So
sorry, Claire, Shannon has indicated that she would like to stay on the board as well. I think we
Yeah.
had replaced her with
I just put Georgia
Chad.
in there while she was on maternity leave.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I
That's
would like to stay on the board though while I'm on my leave.
Okay, no problem. I'll update that then. Okay, so an addition of Shannon McGinty, who is currently on leave from her position at Lake Windermere Ambassadors. So I'm not hearing any nominations. So does anybody object to adopting the board as presented? I'll give you an opportunity to speak up if you object, and please state your name if you do. Okay. All right. So not hearing anybody. As we have no objections, we have now accepted the board as presented, including Shannon McGinty. Okay. Thank you, everybody. All right. So that sort of concludes an update on the formalities. I just really wanted to say thank you to everybody again for attending today. And don't forget, if you feel like you've missed something, this meeting is being recorded. So it will be available on our website in the next week or so. I'm now going to open up the floor to questions. If you have any questions on subjects that were presented in today's meeting, please write them in the chat box or unmute yourself if you're calling in, but we realize no one's doing that, so that's fine. And also, if you have to leave and you feel like you have any other questions that won't have the opportunity to be answered today, please feel free to email me at cbwn.coordinator@gmail.com. All right, so I'm open to questions. If anybody has any questions they would like to ask about any of the information that was presented today, please feel free to pop it in the chat box. Okay, I'll just check to see if anyone has any previous questions. All right, so Anne had a question, and she was asking or saying that she's not clear what kind of input we would like for the hydrologist meeting. So Kat, maybe you could speak to that.
I'm not sure either. I don't know that I could speak to it necessarily. So for example, Suzanne Bailey had a hydrology study done for the Columbia River wetlands. And so that was done by Mac Hydro. And so that is an example of her, so that's kind of her input of this has been a priority area for us. And so this is what we've done. And I think maybe knowing what your priority areas are and what's being worked on already would be helpful, just to contextualize the conversation for the hydrologist, so that because we're not, not everybody knows what everyone has done. And so you want to leverage some of the existing energy, right? So I think that's probably what I meant by that.
Okay. And if you still feel like you need more clarification, feel free to pop another question in there. Also, you can contact me or Kat outside of this webinar, this presentation as well. So the next question I can see on there is, what is the Data Hub website? The reason we haven't shared that yet is because it is live, but because we're still in the process of ironing out any last minute issues with it, we're not going to actually share the website just yet until it's sort of ready for people to use and we're ready for groups to provide comment. So when that time comes and we feel like we've sort of worked out any potential issues with it, we're going to be sharing it with the groups that are part of the network and asking for feedback, and then eventually we'll be sharing it with the public. Once again, if you feel like you need more information, please feel free to reach out. Okay, let me just go up the chat here for a moment and see if there were any other questions which were asked earlier on.
But Claire, I think we had a sort of soft launch date, did we not, Nicole?
Sorry, no, we don't have a date decided yet. But we did agree that the Columbia Basin Watershed Network members would be the audience of the soft launch, and then we would get feedback at that time. And hold the webinars, distribute the user manual, and get the website populated with some data before making more of a formal public launch with press releases and whatnot.
Great, thank you.
All right, does anybody else have any questions they want to ask? We have about 10 minutes left if you feel there's anything you need more clarification on, or. Okay, seems like we maybe have covered everything. Well, in the event that something pops into your mind after this, after you've sort of digested the information, please feel free to reach out. I'm still checking emails, so I'd be happy to get back to you or refer you on to someone with more information if need be. Once again, thank you everybody for attending today. I hope you found it useful, and I hope you didn't have too many issues with the Zoom platform. It's always a learning experience. So thanks again, and I hope to be speaking with you all soon and reaching out to you very shortly with the Data Hub website, which we're really excited about. So thank you everybody. Have a lovely evening and take care.